Have you ever, whether recently or at some point in your life, felt an unexplainable, magnetic connection to someone? Those moments when a simple glance feels like a full conversation? Emotions that arise without logic, a mysterious pull as if this person was made for you. But here's a painful question. What happens when that connection is not returned? What happens when, despite everything you feel, despite the intensity and depth of your emotions, the other person simply doesn't choose you back? There's a hidden truth here, one that most people avoid, one that hurts to admit. Psychology, specifically the work of Carl Jung, the revolutionary thinker who unraveled the hidden world of the unconscious mind, uncovers something few dare to confront. A dangerous psychological trap that explains why so many men obsess over women who reject them, only to lose interest shortly after finally winning them over. This pattern is not rare. In fact, it's unfolding all around you right now, often unnoticed. Whether you're single or caught in the chaos of an unstable relationship, what you're about to discover may be the key that saves you from years of emotional heartbreak. The truth is staggering. Over 90% of women go their entire lives without ever recognizing the powerful unconscious pattern that secretly shapes their romantic destiny. This isn't just another text full of recycled dating advice. This is the kind of revelation the relationship industry hopes you never stumble upon. Because what Jung uncovered about the male psyche changes everything. Right now, without knowing it, you might be sabotaging your chances of ever being truly loved. And here's the part no one wants to say out loud. The man who seems madly in love with you today may not actually be in love with you. He may be projecting an inner image, a psychological ghost onto you. And once that illusion fades, abandonment often becomes inevitable. Even worse, the stronger and more passionate his love seems at the beginning, the more likely it is that he's fallen for a fantasy, not for who you really are. If you continue walking blind through your love life, without understanding this crucial insight, you're destined to repeat the same painful cycle over and over again, the same emotional confusion, the same heartbreak, just like millions of other women do every single day. Every moment you go without this knowledge is a moment you give away your power, letting unconscious forces dictate your romantic fate. But today, this knowledge is available to you, right now, for a limited time, before this window closes again. Carl Jung, one of the greatest psychological minds in history, identified a subtle yet explosive dynamic that lives inside the male unconscious. A pattern so counterintuitive and hidden, it explains why some men seem consumed by passion, only to vanish when you finally give in. Jung found that men are psychologically wired with a deep, primal attraction to mystery and challenge. This creates a cycle, an addictive loop of attraction and rejection that leaves countless women hurt, confused, and emotionally drained. Time is short, but while this door is still open, we're going to explore what Jung called the projection of the anima, the inner feminine figure within the male psyche, and how this ancient mechanism explains why men often fall hardest for the women who withdraw, who seem just out of reach. Understanding this could change the way you see love forever. Because if you don't recognize these signs, if you keep walking blind through relationships, the price might be years of your life wasted on love that was never real to begin with. Now, prepare yourself. You're about to enter a deep psychological journey, one that will uncover 5 hidden mechanisms identified by Jung. 5 layers of truth that explain this destructive romantic dynamic. And by the end, you'll hold a rare understanding, one that very few people in the world ever gain. Mechanism 1, projection of the anima, the ghost in the mirror. What really happens inside a man's mind when a woman pulls away? Jung uncovered something disturbing, a powerful psychological phenomenon called the anima, the inner feminine archetype embedded in every man's unconscious mind. This inner figure silently shapes a man's attraction and his perception of women. Most dating experts completely overlook this force, but it's the first key to unlocking why rejection breeds obsession. When a woman becomes emotionally distant, something strange occurs. She becomes a blank canvas, a surface onto which the male psyche begins to project its ideal image. The emotional space created by distance gets filled with fantasy, with idealization, with imagined perfection. The more distant she is, the more room the man's mind has to fill in the blanks with dreams, expectations, and desire. It's not you he's falling for, it's who he imagines you to be. This is the first painful secret that nearly every woman misses. When a man becomes intensely obsessed with you after you withdraw, he may not be falling in love with the real you at all. He's falling for a psychological ghost he created in his own mind. And once this illusion shatters, once reality collides with fantasy, disappointment sets in. Fast, and often he disappears. Have you ever asked yourself why some men chase after a woman with obsessive energy, only to lose interest once they finally have her? It's because the illusion cannot survive closeness. As intimacy increases, fantasy fades. And what's left behind often isn't what he expected or wanted. Think back. Think. How many times have you felt that a man wasn't actually in love with you, but with some version of you that only existed in his mind? What if you had seen this pattern sooner? Before it wrecked your hopes, before it stole your time, before it shattered your heart? Mechanism 2. Emotional scarcity. When hard to get becomes irresistible. Here's the second revelation, and it will challenge everything you believe about attraction. Jungian psychology reveals a primitive, unconscious mechanism in the male mind, one so deep that even most men are unaware of its influence. Men are wired to equate scarcity with value. When a woman is emotionally distant or hard to access, it triggers an ancient instinct, a survival-level response that associates rarity with importance. The more unavailable she seems, the more valuable she becomes in his eyes. This isn't something he chooses. It happens automatically, beneath awareness. Which is why a woman who is always emotionally available and loving may be tragically seen as less valuable, while a woman who withholds affection becomes a prized conquest. It sounds harsh. It is, but ignoring it only leads to more pain. Now ask yourself honestly, have you ever found yourself inexplicably drawn to someone who barely noticed you while brushing off someone who cared deeply and was always there? What does that say about our most primal psychological wiring? Picture this. You meet two people. One openly expresses interest, kindness, and desire to connect. The other is distant, hot and cold, emotionally unpredictable. Here, one moment, gone the next. Which one stirs your desire more intensely? Why does our mind seem programmed to value those who reject us? Many people remain unknowingly locked inside a recurring emotional cycle, one that seems invisible at first, but reveals itself through the repetition of patterns: intense infatuation, confusion, disappointment, and emotional withdrawal. These loops are not random. They follow a script written in the unconscious, a script that plays out again and again until it is finally seen for what it truly is. No matter how different the faces, names, or stories may appear on the surface, the emotional core remains hauntingly similar. And here lies the harsh truth. Unless someone becomes conscious of these inner mechanisms, they will continue to relive the same emotional dynamics indefinitely. They will keep mistaking emotional turbulence for passion and illusion for intimacy. Now we approach a psychological force that shapes relationships in profound yet hidden ways, a force rarely spoken about and even less understood. Mechanism 3. The archetype of the unattainable maiden. a mythological trap. This is where the journey deepens. Prepare yourself for one of the least understood yet most influential forces in the male unconscious. Carl Jung identified an ancient archetype embedded within the depths of the collective masculine psyche, what he referred to as the unattainable maiden. This is not simply a metaphor or poetic symbol. It is a primal psychological mechanism that governs male attraction on a level beyond reason or conscious intention. When a woman creates emotional distance, whether by withdrawing, showing indifference, or remaining elusive, she unknowingly activates this archetype in the unconscious mind of the man. Suddenly, something profound shifts. He is no longer relating to the real woman in front of him, with her complexities, imperfections, and humanity. Instead, he begins to respond to a mythic figure, an imagined feminine ideal that promises healing, meaning, and even spiritual rebirth. This isn't ordinary attraction. It's symbolic possession. The man becomes captivated by an internal image, an echo of something ancient. And that image hijacks his emotions, his behavior, and even his sense of self. This projection operates like a dream woven over reality. The woman becomes a canvas for his deepest longings, not because of who she is, but because of what she represents to him. He isn't falling in love with her. He's falling in love with a reflection of his own lost wholeness, disguised in feminine form. Think for a moment. How many of the most intense romantic experiences in your life felt like destiny, like fate was pulling invisible strings? How often did those relationships begin with a sense of euphoria, a feeling of being finally understood, finally seen? And how many of those ended in disappointment, confusion, or emotional emptiness? What Jung revealed is that many so-called soul connections are actually powerful psychological projections. When a man declares, "I've never met anyone like you," he may not realize he's not speaking to you, but to an idealized version of you that only exists in his mind. These experiences can feel magical at first, even transcendent. But behind the enchantment lies a trap. Because no human being can sustain the weight of an archetype, especially one built on fantasy. And so, over time, the illusion begins to crack. The real person starts to emerge, and with that comes disappointment, frustration, and often withdrawal. The man who once seemed so enchanted begins to pull away, not because you changed, but because the projection dissolved. Here you must ask yourself a question that can shift the entire foundation of your relational experience. Would you rather be adored as an ideal that can never be fully reached, or cherished as a real human being with flaws, emotions, and depth? Because the truth is this: one form of love will eventually fade under the weight of its own illusion. The other, though less dramatic, less euphoric, holds the power to endure. But here, finally, is the transformation you've been waiting for. This is the turning point, the moment of clarity that justifies all the tension and build-up so far. Understanding this shadowy dynamic doesn't mean manipulating others or surrendering to cold cynicism. Rather, it marks the beginning of a journey toward freedom from unconscious emotional patterns that may have silently governed your love life for years. The moment you recognize a projection for what it is, it begins to lose its grip on you. That invisible force that once pulled your strings begins to fade. And now, the final revelation, the one that shifts everything. The real power behind this knowledge isn't about learning how to create emotional distance to gain control over others. It's about recognizing the moments when you, yourself, are being unconsciously driven by hidden projections. True liberation happens when you're finally able to pierce through the thick illusions that shape both male and female behavior. Illusions that have long dictated how we relate, connect, and fall in love. Imagine building a relationship in which you are truly seen and loved for who you actually are, not as a fantasy or a symbol, but as your full, complex self. Imagine the profound relief of no longer being a blank screen for someone else's unconscious dreams and unmet needs. Imagine the power of becoming a human being in real connection, rather than a myth in someone else's mind. The most powerful question then is not how to manipulate attraction through psychological insight. The real question, the one that changes lives, is how to transcend these ancient primal patterns in order to form relationships grounded in reality, not projection. Because only when we cease being mere mirrors for unconscious desires can we begin to experience love that truly transforms. A love that isn't bound by the scripts of childhood or the weight of ancestral archetypes. A love that's alive, conscious, and mutual. What you choose to do with this insight will determine the entire course of your romantic destiny. The decision, as always, lies in your hands. The relational intelligence you've just uncovered goes completely against the grain of modern dating advice. It stands in stark contrast to what is popularly taught about attraction, connection, and compatibility. This is rare, psychologically rich knowledge, something that could quite literally save you from years of unnecessary emotional pain. But it will only help you if you act now, before the unconscious forces that have shaped your love life reclaim control. Jungian wisdom about the projected masculine is not commonly available to most women, not because it's too complex to understand, but because it reveals a deeply uncomfortable truth about attraction and desire. Right now, countless women in your life are silently trapped in cycles of idealization and abandonment. They're asking themselves over and over again, why the same thing keeps happening, why men pursue them with intensity, only to suddenly grow distant and disappear without warning. They are suffering unnecessarily because they do not yet see what has just been revealed to you. The window to transform your romantic experiences with this understanding is closing fast. Each passing day, thousands of women miss the chance to create genuine emotional bonds simply because they remain caught in loops of projection. If any of the 5 alarming signs of projection we've discussed feel familiar, if they have shown up in your past or current relationships, don't keep this knowledge to yourself. Share this message with someone who desperately needs to hear it before they make another irreversible mistake. You could be the reason someone escapes years of emotional confusion and heartbreak. Here's what I invite you to do right now. Look back at your romantic history and ask yourself, which of the 5 signs of masculine projection has shown up the most? Was it intense idealization, an obsession with rejection, or maybe it was the mystical transformation he claimed to have felt just by being in your presence? This is more than a reflective exercise. Your insight could literally be the lifeline for another woman on the brink of repeating your same painful patterns. Share your experience in the comments. Your courage to expose this hidden mechanism might become the exact awakening someone else needs. Leave your story, and it might be the message that breaks the cycle for someone else. Then, subscribe and turn on notifications to make sure you don't miss the next part of this exclusive Jungian psychology series. In the upcoming post, we'll explore the most dangerous masculine archetype that every woman unconsciously projects, and understanding it could immediately stop the repeated cycle of painful relationships in your life. This kind of deep psychological wisdom isn't something you'll find easily. It's not part of mainstream dating advice, but it holds the key to understanding and transforming the patterns that define your love life. Join the growing circle of women who are waking up to the invisible forces shaping their emotional world. Your future self will thank you for taking this step today. And let me ask you, what if the most intense obsession a man feels when you reject him has absolutely nothing to do with you? What if it's actually revealing the deepest childhood wound he's still desperately trying to heal through you? That one psychological realization alone can completely change the way you interpret male behavior. It can free you forever from internalizing the emotional chaos of men's reactions. Jung uncovered something so deep about the male psyche that even modern therapists rarely have the courage to confront it. When a man becomes obsessively drawn to a woman who creates distance, what's truly happening beneath the surface is an unconscious attempt to heal a primal wound, an ancient unresolved separation from the maternal. Every boy goes through a natural process of detaching from the mother, an emotional and psychological weaning that shapes the very foundation of his masculine identity. But no matter how natural, this separation always leaves a wound, a deep longing for the unconditional love he once experienced in her presence. Here's the mechanism that will forever shift your understanding. When you create emotional distance, you're not simply making yourself seem more desirable. You are unconsciously triggering that early, unresolved maternal wound inside him. His obsessive pursuit is not really about you. It's about healing the original rejection that shaped his entire emotional blueprint. The result? A devastating cycle. The more you pull away, the more his wound is activated, driving him into a state of emotional pursuit that can become pathologically intense. And ironically, the moment you become fully available, when that emotional tension disappears, his interest may vanish just as mysteriously as it appeared. Why? Because you've removed the very emotional friction that mirrored his earliest loss. Think back to your past relationships with ruthless honesty. Have you noticed how men with more traumatic childhoods often became the most obsessively attached when you created space between you? That's not a coincidence. It's the wounded boy inside the man, trying to recreate and resolve his original trauma. What few truly understand is that this cycle creates an emotional dependency more addictive than any chemical substance. The neurochemical cocktail released during these cycles of pursuit, brief connection, and renewed rejection creates a kind of psychological addiction that can last for years, if not a lifetime, unless brought into conscious awareness. Ask yourself, in your current relationship, are you unconsciously playing the role of the rejecting maternal figure from his past? Are you stuck in a loop that can never lead to a secure, healthy bond? The most uncomfortable truth of all is this. Many women instinctively sense this dynamic and end up manipulating it, often without realizing it, as a way to maintain emotional control in their relationships. But this manipulation comes with a terrible cost. It keeps the relationship trapped in a state of arrested emotional development, rooted in neurotic attachment rather than genuine love. And now, we arrive at the most transformative moment of this entire journey. The point at which knowledge becomes power, and power becomes the possibility of true change. The uncomfortable truth is that projection works both ways. Just as men project their anima onto you, you also project your animus onto them. That feeling of "he completes me" is often not love or destiny, but simply the externalization of masculine traits within you that you haven't yet embraced or integrated. Here lies one of the most profound revelations. When you stop projecting and begin to integrate both your inner feminine and masculine aspects, something remarkable happens. You become psychologically whole. This inner completeness generates a new kind of magnetism. No longer driven by desperation or neediness, your presence becomes grounded, radiant, and authentic. Attraction no longer comes from a place of lack, but from the quiet gravity of one whole being recognizing another. Carl Jung called this conjunctio, the sacred marriage of opposites within the psyche. And when this union takes place inside of you, your relationships begin to shift. They evolve from unconscious repetition into conscious choice. You no longer seek someone to fill your emptiness. Instead, you choose someone who reflects your wholeness back to you. And this integration does not mean abandoning your femininity. It means reclaiming your full self. Strength and softness, logic and intuition, assertiveness, and receptivity, all existing within you without conflict, without rejection. The paradox is this: true intimacy only becomes possible when you no longer need it to feel complete. When you are whole within yourself, you can finally see others as they truly are. Not as mirrors of your projections, not as vessels to carry your unmet desires. So ask yourself, how would your relationships transform if you approach them not from hunger, but from fullness? What would happen if you stopped seeing men as carriers of your projected animus and instead saw them clearly in all their real flawed humanity? And what if they too could see you not through the lens of their anima fantasies, but as the deeply complex, multidimensional person you actually are? That is the ultimate liberation Jung's psychology offers us. Freedom from the unconscious forces that have ruled our relationships for centuries. This is the choice before you now. Will you continue to participate in the ancient cycle of projection and rejection, now armed with insight that might give you temporary power but long-term pain? Or will you step entirely out of the pattern and begin something new? One path promises control. The other demands courage. The first may get you attention. The second may change your life. To choose the second is to choose presence over fantasy, truth over illusion, depth over intensity. It's to build something that doesn't collapse the moment projection fades. Something real, something lasting. Imagine a world where relationships are no longer fueled by unconscious needs, but by conscious recognition, where connections grow stronger with time, rather than burning fast and dying young. This is what Jung's work opens the door to, not just better relationships, but a more integrated humanity. The deepest truth I can leave you with is this: the love, wisdom, and strength you sought in others was never outside of you. It was always there, hidden within you, waiting for your own recognition. Your wholeness doesn't come from finding the perfect partner to project onto. It comes from seeing yourself fully, clearly, completely. That is the sacred marriage Jung spoke of, not between two people, but between the long divided aspects of your inner world. So now I ask you one final question. What will you do with this psychological truth that so few ever discover? Will you return to the old dance of longing and loss, of intensity that always ends in abandonment? Or will you use this awareness to free yourself and begin to build something truly radical, relationships grounded in realness, in mutual seeing, in authentic connection? The decision you make now won't just shape your future relationships. It will shape the entire course of your emotional life. Most will return to unconscious patterns, but I believe you are different. Choose consciousness. Choose what is real over what is familiar. Choose liberation over the illusion of control. And remember, the same psychological forces that once bound you can now be the foundation of your freedom. The power has always been within you. Jung simply showed us where to look.